Hey, Wade.
Good morning, Rob. How's life treating you today?
Long time no see. It's been like, what, 3 days since our last episode together?
2 days here. You're on metric time.
Yeah, so, bro, seems to me that season 4 of Magic.tv, The Modern Magicians, is coming out swinging. And one tradition that's close to our hearts is the Grimoire traditions. Am I right?
Oh, yes. Absolutely.
I remember a
That's
long
how we
time
met.
ago when I was still a Padawan, some really good looking guy with long hair in a place called Ancient Ways sold me a book for $30 called The Lemegeton and put me down a rabbit hole which would define three-fourths of my personal practice. And Grimoire, yeah, that was you. And now you're much older. Now you're the Jedi Master Wade, and I'm Jedi Knight Robert Rubin. But through that, I have seen a lot of texts, a lot of authors. I've read a lot of books. And I'm sure we both agreed that back in the day, these practices were really difficult to get the nuggets of knowledge from, right? You'd have to really spend days on end digging through different texts just to make something work, right?
Even just getting the text, back when I was a wee tot, I had to mail order stuff out of a catalog. So I have no idea what I'm getting. My first tarot deck, I had to trace it. I went to a library and I had to trace them onto those little pieces of paper that you write the Dewey Decimal numbers on. And so I had a hand-traced tarot deck for my first one. It was insane.
So what more the Grimoire tradition? Now, although there have been some amazing authors out there, shout out to authors like, Aaron Leach or Stephen Skinner, who have done some amazing creations. Recently, both you and I were hit with a slobber knocker of a set of books. Books that we feel are going to lead the next generation of Grimoire mages. And those were none other than the Grimoire Encyclopedia. Remember that?
Oh, yes.
Weren't you blown away by the simplicity of that book?
It's absolutely amazing. It's like having a phone book for demons. Anything you want to look up, it's got all of your rituals, everything is there, and you can dial in exactly who you're looking for. It's great.
So we're really honored today to take season 4's episode 2, The Modern Magicians, to have not only the author and the founder of the Grimoire Encyclopedia, but the recently appointed editor of Hadean Press, the ever so educational David Rankine, as our guest. So good afternoon and welcome to Magic.tv, David.
Good afternoon and thank you very much.
Well, we are really honored to have you here with us today. Before we start, I just wanted to say, David, thank you for all the works that you have contributed to the study of magic. You are an inspiration, sir.
Thank you very much. What I set myself out to do at a young age is dedicate my life to magic, and I've just tried to always be true to that.
Well, you're doing it for all of us. So I'm sure the viewers out there would like to know. They would like to know, how did it all begin? What was the origin story of David Rankine, who would have been one of the pioneers of modern occult study and grimoire traditions here in the world? Please share with us your backstory.
Okay, I'll start at practice because anyone can say, when I was 3 years old, I did this, But when I was 14, a friend of mine gave me a catalogue from an occult supplier called Occultique.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked at it and I decided to order half a dozen books. And from that moment on, things just escalated. And I think, obviously, my hand has been guided. My first order of books was Techniques of High Magic by Francis King and Stephen Skinner, Crowley's Magic, Levi's Transcendental Magic, and then Mathers's Key of Solomon, Grimoire of Armadale, and Sacred Magic by Merlin the Mage.
Heavy books.
That is a hefty load of books for your first order.
Yeah, and half of those grimoires. So I went through Techniques of High Magic, did all the practices in that, and from then on I devoted 2 hours a day, every day, to meditation and ritual, and doing the practices in there. So, things like pentagram ritual and hexagram ritual twice a day, middle pillar, ritual of the rose cross, things like that. Trying out the other practices that were in there. Took the vow in there, devoting my life to magic. And it just went from there, because back in those days, the only access was from there was in Britain, there's like a few magical bookshops, and you would wait eagerly for a catalogue to come through the door of what they had, the latest catalogue. And it's back in those days, I was at school. So when the catalogue came, I had to be a few minutes late for school because usually they were 9 o'clock. The bookshop would, they would officially open, so they would take their orders, and you would ring up and say, right, I want number 13, number 27, number 65. Have you still got those books? And it'd be yes, no. And then they would take the order. You would send the money and get the books. And yeah, I was just doing buying lots and lots of books and trying out everything in them I could find until I was coming up to 18. I used to play a lot of badminton. That was like one of my sports of choice because wearing glasses, contact sports like football and rugby, not the best idea.
Yeah, definitely.
And I used to play at quite a high level. I was playing for my county and I was playing competitively for clubs. And one day, a guy came up to me at this club and he noticed I used to have a little silver Tree of Life pendant I wore around my neck. And he said, I've noticed you've got a Tree of Life. And I said, yeah. He said, I've never heard you talking anything about that or anything related. And I said, well, why would I? What I do is nobody else's business. And he just looked at me and went, that's the right answer. He then said, I'm in a magical lodge. Would you be interested in joining it? And I said, very much. So he said, right, next Saturday, I'll meet you and take you to this place to meet the master of the temple. So I went and had an interview with this guy. And he said, right, we're going to come back here next Saturday at the same time. I'm going to ask you a load of questions. If you get any question wrong, I'm not interested. Went back. Fortunately, by that time, I'd spent years already learning all the correspondence and stuff because the questions were mainly about correspondences and things. I got everything right. I got into the lodge and was really on my way because the lodge was derived from Stella Matutina, but they basically did grimoire work. And the guy who was the MT had an eidetic memory, which made conjuration very easy for him. And it was very old school. You know, we did not meet outside of meetings. There was no socializing. Once I was in, that guy who used to be in the same badminton club as left, went and joined another club. He couldn't be in the same club as me. We were not allowed to see each other socially outside of the rituals. We only met for the rituals. We never saw each other at all outside of the rituals. Like I say, it was very private, very old school. And that I got a really good grounding from there and sort of training. I mean, I moved away and then I had to leave because you had to live in the area to be in it. I left on very good terms to then be often disappointed by the people I met who I thought, great, I'll meet loads of new people, I'll learn lots of stuff, assuming that if people were into magic, they would automatically make their own incenses and know how to cast a chart and all this other stuff that I had been doing for years. I just assumed that was what you did. And I found the majority of the people I met said they were interested in magic or practiced magic, but it was often lip service until I started meeting, here and there, meeting good people who were, a few years later, when I was 20 or so living in Cheltenham, I met a guy. There were 2 magical bookshops at the time in Cheltenham. And there was another guy, and we used to buy the books each other wanted. And it was always, he got there first, or I got there before you. And then we met and we just really clicked. We ended up sharing a place and doing a lot of rituals together. And then we got involved with a group that was set up in Oxford, and we moved to Oxford. And things just kind of went from there. That was like a Thelemic-based group. And got involved with various other things along the way. In my 20s, my first wife was an Alexandrian High Priestess. I got involved in, initiated and was in Alexandrian Wicca for a while. although whenever I ran stuff, it was with a much more ritual magic bent and teaching people. Because I think Wicca in its Book of Shadows is like a skeleton. You put your own muscles and flesh onto it. So the muscles and flesh that I put on, if I'm co-running a coven, is very much the ritual magic and even conjuration. Teaching people, usually with the Olympic spirits or the intelligences, as a good intro. So it just kind of went on from there. Involvement with good people and groups and practicing along the way.
If you don't mind me asking, when did you decide to make the leap from just practitioner to saying, no, I have actually something that I want to contribute to this? Because I have a lot of your books, but I was never able to determine which your first book was. So when did you decide to say, I want to contribute to the study of occultism and put pen to paper and start writing your first work?
The first article I wrote was back in 1987 for a magazine.
Mm-hmm.
Then in later that year, when I was in Oxford, I ended up co-authoring a magazine there called Ever Hey, which is like a pagan magical mag, which I did for a couple of years before I moved to London. And then in 1991, I moved to Cardiff, and then took over another magazine, which I had to Dragon's Brew. And then was running a correspondence course, but it wasn't until 97 that my first book, which I co-wrote with my partner at the time, Magic Without Peers, came out. So 97. So at which point I've been practicing for 18 years.
And what was your inspiration behind writing that book, if you don't mind us asking?
It was largely the material from the correspondence course that we were running, which was, so it's like basic ritual magic and witchcraft practices. So actually this would make quite a good primer book for people getting into things. And so that book, which Capelban at the time published it, and for the first 2 or 3 years it was their best-selling book. It sold quite a few thousand copies. It was very well received at the time, which kind of inspired me to then carry on with writing more. I mean, I used to write in the 90s. I wrote quite a lot for different magazines as well, sometimes under pseudonyms.
Now, here's another thing I learned about you just right now, that you and my dear friend and Magic.TV guest, Stephen Skinner, actually formed Golden Horde together, that you guys put together. And because of that, you added early on some of the most, hard to get texts that occultism had to offer. I mean, like you said, you and him together created but compiled the Goetia of Dr. Rudd. You also have the Book of Treasure Spirits. I'm a real fan of that one. And a lot of other books came from the creation of Old Golden Horde. So what was your inspiration for actually now jumping from the writing aspect to, well, why don't we publish our own things?
Well, Stephen, back in the 70s, had done Hadean Press, putting out some really good things like the 4th book of Occult Philosophy and True and Faithful Relation. And I think he was looking for somebody that he clicked with, that he could do that work with. And he was out sort of in the Far East at the time, living out there. So we just clicked. Within 5 minutes of meeting, we decided to form Golden Horde and work together. A mutual friend introduced us, and he said, I want to show you this manuscript. And he showed me the manuscript, which was the one that was the first book with the Enochian stuff. And he said, what do you think of this? And I said, I think it needs to be published. And he says, do you want to work on it with me? So yeah. And he said, should we form a company? I was like, yeah, let's just do it. And then at the time I was writing full time. I was making a living writing, because I was writing for a big part work called Enhancing Your Mind, Body, Spirit, which I wrote hundreds of articles for. So I was making a decent salary off writing and being their consultant. So I had the time to, literally spend years in the British Library, Monday to Friday, from when it opened at 10 till 5 in the afternoon, and also places like the Welcome, which is just down the road from the British Library. looking at the manuscripts. And when Stephen was over in London visiting, then we would go to them together, and we'd go off to places like the Bodleian in London, in Oxford, and go looking at manuscripts. And I would show him stuff that I had found, saying, I think we should do this, like Clavis Inferni. I found that manuscript in the Welcome, and it blew me away. I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. It's only a small text, and it was a cipher. It's obviously going to take a while to decipher, but I looked at it, and the fact that back then they had a card system, and I could see that nobody had looked at that manuscript for over 50 years. And so Steve and I went, and I said, have a look at this. And he was like, oh, we've got to do this. I was like, yeah, don't we? So we then paid the Welcome to photograph it and for the rights to use it. They then immediately popped up on their website, low-res copies, which somebody else then ripped off and did a copy of to get it out before ours. But ours, actually, that was going to be volume 2 in the SourceWorks series. But it took us a few years to decipher it all, because a lot of the Latin is contracted and reversed and contracted, and there's things from lots of different symbol sets and magical alphabets, and there's odd bits we couldn't get. Fortunately, we had Joseph Peterson helped us with a couple of bits we couldn't work out. And a friend of mine who's a professor, Peter Forshaw, helped with a couple, and so it ended up coming out as volume 5. And we did Keys to the Gateway, Greece of Dr. Rudd, and the Vertical Key of Solomon in between, while that was in the background. But yeah, it was amazing times. There'd be times where you're just sitting looking at manuscripts and felt like your brain was going to melt and come out of your ears from having these insights, and just had to go and have a break sometimes. Like at the Welcome, there's 20 different Key of Solomon manuscripts there, for example.
I have a bit of an esoteric question about all of this, because of course the scholarly side is the study and the editing and then the compilation of these manuscripts. But at any time, did you feel that you were being guided by a higher force to do this? Like all of a sudden things just laid out and all of a sudden these things just popped up? Or were you just really just putting all of your elbow grease into this?
When I was 16, the first conjuration I did, and the pact I made, what I asked for was to be put in the right place at the right time. And that's a pact that has repeatedly paid dividends over the decades, in that I've often just ended up being in the right situation or meet the right person at the right time to progress and go forward. So, that I look back at what I did now for that conjuration, it makes me cringe, because obviously I had the armor of the naive innocent at 16. But, the particular spirit that I called has always delivered, and I have always delivered on my part of the deal we made. And, it's continued even to this day, for me to end up being in the right place at the right time. So, yeah, I definitely think that there have been times where I was nudged into doing the things that I did. Absolutely.
That's amazing. Because
people talk about what's the greatest possible magical power, or whatever superpower you would want. Some people want to fly, or they want to be bulletproof. Luck is, I would have to say, is the greatest magical ability that you could really want. And being in the right place at the right time is just way more valuable than being bulletproof.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because I don't know if you know, this entire show is actually something transmitted based upon the patron of the show, which is here on the corner, which is the demon Belial. There's a whole story behind that brought me and Wade together, and since then we've been really enjoying connecting to people like you. So it just shows that sometimes we are but instruments for a higher power to manifest its will through. So all the great things that you've done, that's why I asked that question. Did you ever feel you were being guided, like you were just a piece on the board? Because you have done things like, I kid you not, I'm still blown away by the Grimoire encyclopedia that I showed it to my 19-year-old son. and he was actually like using it, and he doesn't know anything about the occult. And I said, at your age, my head would have exploded just to have something simplified. So it's going to bring me to another question I had. Although you don't need to answer it in detail if it's private, but definitely with all of the lore and the writing and the study and academic approach you've done to the study of grimoire magic, what are some of the best, how do I say, the best successes you've had working with grimoire magic that you can share openly if you're willing to?
Okay, where should we start? I suppose an obvious one is with Pentacles of the Key of Solomon, which are one of my favorite things to work with. I mean, from simple things like, when COVID hit, all of my family and my friends who had health issues, I sent Pentacles to. Not a single one of them got COVID. So I consider that a success. You could say coincidence, but that's a pretty good success rate, 100%. One of my favorites. Okay, it's a favorite, even though I was grandstanding and being a bit of an arrogant idiot. The result is the bit that's I like. was doing a conjuration from the Hygromantia. In the Hygromantia you have an angel and a demon of every hour of every day of the week. So it's like 168 of them. So you call the Greek god, and then the planetary angel, and then the planetary demon. And because it was being done on a Monday with Selene, I sort of substituted in and did Hecate because of, there's a lot of connection between Hecate and Selene, and it was for a Hecate gathering. And it was outdoors, and there was a big fire. And so first of all, they called Hecate, then the planetary angel, and then the planetary demon. And like I said, I was grandstanding, and we had a fire in the middle, and I called it into the fire, and a humanoid shape formed in the flames, and there's about a dozen people there, most of whom immediately started freaking out a bit because they'd never been at a conjuration, and to suddenly see something that's like, special effects magic. Oh my God, there's like a humanoid shape formed from the flames that's talking. I'd say that as one of the biggest successes, because after being present at that ritual, you couldn't doubt the reality of magic and of the individual existence of spirits. So that's, I think, one of my best, even though I was being a bit of an arsehole and I shouldn't have done that from the point of view of good practice and and ethics. I wouldn't do it again. But like I say, that was quite a lot of years ago, and sometimes, even after many years, ego can sometimes get the better of you. There's a couple of others which I really like, but I can't really go into detail because there's aspects that are slightly. Okay. One example, I'll give a partial example. Archangels tricky to call. They take a shed load of work to get archangels to turn up. People say they talk to them all the time, and most of the time they're deluding themselves. They are at the top of the tree, and if they do turn up, you've done everything right, and they're in a good mood. I called up the Archangel Gabriel, and the circumstances were, like the location, everything were perfect, and did actually turn up. And I asked, there was a particular manuscript I was trying to find, and one of the questions I asked was, "Where's this manuscript?" And he said, "It's at such and such a place." I said, "I've already looked there." He said, "Yes, but it's been mislabeled. You need to go back and look for this." And when I did go back afterwards and look, it was exactly as he'd said and mislabeled as he'd said. So, information I could not have known. I always love these, the proofs that you get from this sort of thing. But the thing I got from that was, any question I asked, he just gave the briefest answers, the minimum that was required. And I find archangels do not tend to be very loquacious. Demons are a lot more talkative. Or another time, again, this is an example of a reminder not to ever get lazy or sloppy in your practice. I did a conjuration of the Archangel Michael, and I only did 3 days of preparation and fasting and stuff instead of the 7 that you really should be doing if you're doing that sort of thing. And Michael did not turn up. He sort of sent an angel in his place, which gave me a dressing down for being so rude and presumptuous. And that was a really valuable and important lesson, a reminder that never to get too big for your boots and never to get lazy in your practice. So there's examples that aren't always great successes, but I think illustrate some of the important points.
And these are all valid points that any practitioner of Grimoire magic should already be incorporating into, or even higher magic should be already incorporating into their everyday routines. Which is going to lead me to my next question, Mr. Rankine, which is one of my favorite books of yours, which I had a lot of trouble getting, was Heka. And I wanted to ask, in what way can you say the development of Heka or the generation of Heka in the magician can help aid conjurations, magic? I mean, how would you recommend people incorporate Heka into their regular magic? Because I have an understanding of it, but I would want to learn more about it directly from you, because some people say it's God energy, that it's kind of like a divine energy. And for those who are fans of Dragon Ball Z, that's like one of the highest forms of chi you can get. So from your point of view, how can one incorporate and use Heka in their magical practices?
Okay, so we take a little discussion here then. So we've got Heka on the one hand as being the god of magic, but also being magical power, which everyone has a degree of. And the Egyptians believe some people have more than others. Like the pharaohs had the most, and the dead. Redheads were thought to have more. People who were of short stature, particularly short stature, were thought to have more. So for me, the center of it is Mart. It's the goddess Mart. You know, it's the whole thing of truth and cosmic balance, and all the gods have to promote Mart and perpetuate Mart. So she is really at the center of it, and that is about good living. It's about, you know, having sort of ethical integrity and honesty in your practice and in who you are as a person. So from that point of view, I think Heka offers the personal framework which you require to be successful in magic generally. You know, it's that thing that no matter what your intentions going into magic might be, how dodgy they might be, wanting to control people, you know, become millionaire at whatever the cost, whatever it might be, anyone who practices magic for any serious period of time and puts the disciplined work in my experience, inevitably ends up having this integrity in their beliefs and their practices. It shapes you into a certain sort of person, and that is somebody who perpetuates Mart, who perpetuates truth and balance and justice. So I think it gives, in a sense, the clearest framework of that, which for a lot of people, particularly if they've struggled with the Abrahamic religions in their upbringing, Heka and Mart offers a framework that, you know, transcends that, or well, transcends, but it's separate to that. It's not, doesn't have the baggage of that. Likewise, you know, it's really where one of the places where you're seeing the formation of the techniques, which then end up becoming things like the grimoires. You know, so you're really going back to source. You know, they did use magic circles. They did call, you know, deities in the 4 directions. There's all sorts there that you then subsequently find later on. They are using wands and other magic tools. They are actually threatening the gods at times, and then asking them to leave afterwards. You know, there's you can see a lot of the parallels of what happens later in the practices of Heka. And also, I mean, Egyptian magic, you have the four parts of it, really. You've got your Heka, you've got your Sao, amuletic magic, and then you've got the magic of the dead and working with the ancestors and the dead, which also is something that I think is very important and kind of got lost a bit in the Western mystery tradition in the Victorian age, but has been coming back a lot through the influence of things like the ATRs and Spiritism and other traditions.
In the most simplistic way possible, Mr. Rankine. Because like I first heard about the term Heka, and it encouraged me to buy your book. I didn't even know you had it. I first heard the term from Jack Grail in his 3G program that really just blew my mind. But he mentioned it to me as like it is that internal power that's done through good living. But from your own understanding of the energy of Heka, what would be, let's say, 3 of the most simplistic ways that people can increase Heka in their life? What would you recommend?
Okay. Good living, how you show respect to everything living and dead around you. Honesty, obviously. If you are always true to your word and do the things you say you will do, that will increase your personal power. Every time you break your word and you lie, you weaken yourself, in my opinion. And number 3, discipline practice. Even if it's something as simple as doing a simple burning of incense at sunrise, noon, and sunset with the frankincense, myrrh, and kaifi, like the Egyptians used to do, and saying a few words each. Having something that you do as a daily practice hugely helps, your development. In the quick fix society of next day delivery and write something in 140 characters on Twitter/X or whatever else it might be of the modern age, people have become entitled and lazy. And magic isn't a path for the entitled and lazy. It's a path for the people who are willing to put in the effort and commit to it as a lifelong practice that will cultivate compassion and nobility of spirit and achievement of the best you can be. So that would be my 3, I guess, off the top of my head.
I have just one follow-up question to that because I'm fascinated by it. Like, if you were to be somebody who would follow those precepts, try to live good in a good manner, keep your word, be disciplined, does this have a corresponding effect in your magical practices or even in your evocational practices? Like, if you have more Heka, the more the spirits would listen to you, the more the spirits would be willing to cooperate with you, or the more powerful your magic would be? Or does it just basically overall positively affect your life?
I think both. The spirits expect those things. The spirits expect you to keep your word. They don't want to have a contract with somebody who doesn't keep their word. And if you break your word with spirit, the consequences can be unfortunate, putting it mildly. Likewise, if you demonstrate, people, I think there's a tendency that a lot of people don't think about the fact that just because we might only engage with spirits on occasion when we're dealing with them, it doesn't mean they're unaware of what we're doing at other times.
Good point.
Just as we may look at them in a crystal ball, what's to say that they're not looking at us? And so they will be aware of those behaviors. There's an example. William Lilly, in his autobiography, he mentioned a magician in 17th century London who used to conjure demons for money, and how the demons, if they did turn up, would chastise him because he would have sometimes be drunk, he would be dirty and not clean, and it would make them furious because they expected standards of, of the purification and of cleanliness, that are, we take, they shouldn't be taken for granted. They should be automatic things. If you're going to do conjuration, you have to do those things. If you want to have success, the spirits, as most of them are mainly airy based, they are particularly sensitive to smell. That's why they're like incenses. We have this recorded going back to ancient Sumer. Nice smells to attract the spirits. That's why we're using incense in conjuration, and unpleasant smells to get rid of them or punish them. Not that I like that aspect of the punishment coercion. I've never had to do it myself. But yeah, it's important that those things will increase your chance of success, because if you are demonstrating those qualities as a person, it's not just other humans who will think, oh, that's a decent person I like to engage with. The spirits are more likely to be willing to engage with you because they see that integrity and power in you as well.
It's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. Wait, is there anything you want to ask?
Yeah, it's interesting that you brought up honesty as a way of building your Heka, because I've seen in my experience other magicians that tend to like if they would lie about something, when because as a magician, your whole goal is to have the things that you say become reality. One of my favorite examples of that is a person I knew had called in. He just didn't want to go to work that day. Called in, said, I can't make it today. My car won't start. Because he wanted to go and, goof off, spend the day goofing off, go to the beach and whatever. And so he went out. He called in sick. He goes out to get all of his stuff into the car and go to work, and his car wouldn't start. Because he had actually said his car wouldn't start. So I think as magicians, we really have to be meticulous with the things that we say, in the sense that a lot of them do tend to become reality, because that's kind of the goal of magic, is to be able to affect reality with your words. And when you have something, what's that?
I say, by the same token, be aware of the precision of the words we use.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So it's if you're trying to get someone to believe that things are a certain way, you may end up having more people listening than you think.
Yeah.
So and the other sense of paying your debts, of doing the sense of doing the things that you say you're going to do. So a magician should always pay his debts, whether they're good or bad, because any sort of imbalance one way or the other is going to kind of rob your energy. If you owe somebody, because there always has to be an even exchange, especially with magic, because when you have, so you're doing a reading for somebody, you say, well, okay, there should be some kind of an exchange so that there isn't anything binding that up. There's no, I don't like using the word karma because Westerners always use it wrong, but there's no, there's no bonds left kind of keeping it on one side or the other.
But David, question, how does that justify those who would be considered your stereotypical black magicians, the one who use magic for power, glory, this and that, and they're really rotten individuals and they're just in it for the money, sex, and rock and roll, but they still get the results? Don't you think that kind of debaucherous lifestyle lowers Heka, but they still get the result? So how does that reconcile? I'm just curious about that.
They might get the results, but I think at some point, usually sooner rather than later, they become a puppet rather than an equal partner.
Good way of putting it. Good way of putting it. I mean, couldn't have said it better. Wow, David, that blew me away. And damn, wait, so much more to come in this episode of Magic.tv with David Rankine. And the next thing we're going to be discussing now is, of course, the current event segment of the show. Here, David, we pick your brain about how you feel the trajectory of occultism around the world is going. And we want to know, what do you think? Is occultism coming to a new renaissance, or is this the last Jedi Order? Is your book, the Grimoire Encyclopedia, the soon-to-be Tobin's Spirit Guide of the New Jedi Order, or is this the last hurrah of a dying tradition? We want to know. What do you think?
I certainly don't think it's the last hurrah. I would say rather the opposite. I mean, part of the inspiration to write the Grimoire Encyclopedia is because there's so much good material being put out there that I felt there needed to be something that gave people signposts, particularly for people coming into the Grimoire tradition. Now, it's like, where do they start? You've got a lot of good, there's good academic works, and there's good work by scholar practitioners. There is a wealth of good material, and at the same time, there's also some awful material. So, with the Grimoire Encyclopedia, I really wanted to highlight the good material and give people an overview, which is why each of the 100 chapters has my sort of essential reading section of pointing people to really good books, so that if that's the Grimoire they're interested in, to go that way. I would say certainly the Grimoire tradition is on the rise. I think folk magic is on the rise. Conjuration generally, working with spirits, I think, has become a much bigger thing in the last 20 years. I think people are starting to pay more attention to working with the dead, which I'm very pleased about, because I think that ever since Victorian times, and you have people like Crowley saying spiritualism is akin to necrophilia, there was this really negative attitude to the dead and the ancestors in the Western mystery traditions, or we'll just honour them at Samhain and that's it, they can go away for the rest of the time, which is very frustrating, because the dead, you go back to ancient Egypt, they believe the dead had more magical power than the living. So, they are very beneficial to work with, and also can offer insights and see things that you can't. So, keeping a good relationship with the dead and feeding your dead, I think, is a very important thing. And that's something that I think more and more people are aware of now than they were 20, 30 years ago. I think a lot of that is down to the influence of things like the ATRs. People have seen, like the vital and sort of energetic quality of the ATRs, and they have a lot to offer. And it's made people realize that, there were elements lacking in what's going on with the Western mystery tradition, and that need, to be brought up to speed. And I think that has been happening. So I think certainly, like I say, with spirits and folk magic, I think things are on the rise. With more traditional Western mystery tradition, I think there's always going to be people who are interested in things like Thelema and Golden Dawn and Wicca and things. And if that's your bag, that's cool. But I think more people are wanting to work solo or with friends rather than with the old group structures. Mm-hmm. I think there's a place for both. But I think in the age of social media and global communication, the individual practitioner or the group of friends model is going to be more dominant. So that's kind of the way I see it going. There is, like I say, a lot of good material being written and published, and more good research being done. But there is also a load of badly written stuff and AI generated stuff and things coming out that means that people need to have a little bit of discernment, and that's where shows like this come into, so that people have an idea. There are signposts out there, like you can, this is somebody whose work you might want to look at, and from their work you can see other things, with all the guests that you have on here, for example, and from what you're saying. So I think it's important that we use the positive aspects of social media, like podcasts and things, to counter the tide of dross and dark fluff and all the other stuff that is out there as well.
It brings me to a question that I asked our previous guest, because he was an academic scholar. His name is Dr. Justin Sledge. I asked him from his point of view what the most dangerous book he's ever worked with was, but he said that he couldn't really comment on that because he had his own viewpoint on it. But as a practitioner, David, I'd like to know from your end, with all the studies of the Grimoire traditions, working in the British Library, what could you say was your own book that you read or studied that, like, wait a minute, this could either be dangerous or this is making me feel uncomfortable, made you feel like something was watching you? What's a story of that you could share with us, if any?
I'm trying to think. I don't know if I really think of any book that's made me uncomfortable. I've had books that I've read and gone, oh my God, I love that, I'm so glad it's been written. The last book that, last couple of books I've read that I've gone, oh God, I'm so glad they've written, is like, P.D. Newman's book on theurgy and Jason Miller's Consulting with Spirits. They were both books like, oh, I'm so glad that these books have been written, because they're such well-written books that give people so much insight and access to ideas for practice. So I don't think I've ever seen anything that I've gone, oh my God. Ugh. I mean, I've seen stuff that I thought, I think it's drivel, but I prefer not to name.
Yeah, let's not do that. All right, so we have to do a bit of a segue before we go to the last segment of the show, which was the wonderful manuscript you shared with us, the Clavis Intelligentiarum, which is a complete practical manual of conjuration of the planetary spirits. And we have the honor of being given reviewers copies of that. And I'm sure Wade has got the more superiority when it comes to dissecting these texts. So, Wade, do you have any questions about this upcoming manuscript that you'd like to ask Mr. Rankine?
I loved it. I got through the whole thing. It really took the entire process and laid it out like a bag of snakes, all pulled out straight. In terms of your prep, the actual practice, how to find which particular spirit you need to talk to. It's a really excellent user's manual. Especially when a lot of these grimoires, a lot of the originals are very poorly written, they're poorly laid out. They're really more notebooks than anything else, because a lot of them, they presume that you would already know how to do certain things, and these are just notes of tables and names and numbers. So a lot of this, a lot of the information that you would need to use these is just missing. Because everybody knew it, nobody wrote it down. But this is actually a very excellent treatment of the entire work. I liked it.
It's definitely something I'd purchase for hard copy, because I got to be honest, the way you simplified the work, there were some intelligences before that were just put into grimoires, but not enough context was given as to what they do, what they can do, and what you shouldn't be doing with them. And how you simplified it made it really, really easy to digest. So to that, we thank you. But I wanted to ask you, what was your inspiration in writing this present text?
Well, last year, I was asked to give a workshop for an Italian group, the Sulphur Society. They were running a course, and they wanted to end it with doing conjuration for the people on the course who'd never done conjuration. And in fact, they asked Stephen Skinner and I to both give a presentation. And because of the way it worked out timing-wise, Stephen went first and spoke about the theory, and I did the practical. And so I was putting together the material, and we had in the pre-chat, we spoke to the guys who run the Sulphur Society and said, people have never done conjuration, we think intelligence is a great starting place. They're friendlier, easier to work with, it would be a good start. And as I was putting the material together, Jason Miller's words came into my head, because in the review he did of the Grimoire Encyclopedia, he made a comment about my chapter on practice and said about, this is the voice of Rankine the Conjurer, a voice we don't hear enough of. And that stuck in my head, and I thought, I tell people to start with the intelligences. I've been telling people that for years. But apart from the little booklet I did for Hadean with the conjurations from Sloan 381 of the Intelligences, I didn't give the whole practice. And nowhere does it give you the whole structure of how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm giving empty advice. Well, I think it's a good starting place. I'm not actually helping people by saying, start with the Intelligences. I need to write a book that covers absolutely everything. So somebody who has never done conjuration before can pick this book up and then read through, follow all the steps, and do the conjuration. And not only that, but understand why those steps are there and why you're doing what you do. And that was the inspiration for the book, and that's why I wrote the book.
Well, I'm excited to see it in print, and you could sign me up for a copy. I'm sure Wade would want one too, because it's really something any practicing magician should have on their shelf. And after show, I will be sharing with you a personal experience of mine with one of the intelligence that I'd like to keep private amongst the three of us, which is hilarious. But I'm sure you're going to laugh when you hear about it. So I'm a real believer of working with the intelligences, but you just got to be careful what you wish for, because sometimes, the word that comes out of your mouth might not be exactly what you're wanting. So once again, thank you for the input on the present state of occultism. I mean, it's an exciting time for us all, which brings us now to our final segment of the show, Occultex. This is where we, the viewers, get to learn something straight at the feet of the master. And David Rankine, I have not asked him to prepare anything. This is like straight out of the hat. He can teach us anything he'd like. Maybe it's going to be something grandiose, or it could be his personal peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Let's not hope for that one. So if he pulls out a bottle of peanut butter, I called it. So, David, what do you have for us tonight?
Okay, well, as we just talked about Clavis Intelligentiarum, a little background here. I sent you guys the first draft of the book. Mm-hmm. And at that stage, I was asleep one night, and I was dreaming lucidly, and then I told myself I needed to go and revisit something I wrote back in 2009. And I went and revisited it, and I was like, oh my God, yeah, I've got to put this in the book. So what I put in the book was dun, 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 the fact that the intelligence sigils, as given by Agrippa, are all incorrectly drawn. And people have been using those incorrectly drawn sigils for the last 500 years. Because if you look at the system that sigils are drawn on the cameos, on the magic squares, it's called Heka, from the Hebrew, Aleph, Yod, Quoth, AIQ, and then Bet, Kaf, Resh, BKR, Heka. Because those are the letters. You have a grid of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and the letters, so 1, 10, and 100 go in the 1, 2, 20, 200. And the way you create the sigil is you take the name in the Hebrew and you reduce it down to the largest size that it will fit in. So, for example, if you're on a 5 by 5 square, you have the numbers 1 to 25. So the Hebrew letter Kaf, which has a value of 20, you would go to the point in the square for 20. But if you're on a 4 by 4 square, which only goes to 16, that 20 would get reduced to a 2. Agrippa does not do this half the time. He reduces too far. He reduces a lamed from 30 to 3 when it should be a 30. He also sometimes combines the I and the A in the end of the angelic names to 11, and so you go to 11 on the square instead of to 10 and then to 1 and then to the next number. So I presented all of the Agrippa versions with the corrected versions of the sigils of the intelligences. So for the first time, to my knowledge, in history, the book has the intelligence sigils as drawn to the rules of Heka. What I find funny here is the fact that even though they weren't drawn to those rules by Agrippa, people for the last 500 years have used those sigils successfully, myself included, to call the spirits. Mm-hmm. This whole thing came about back in 2008 because I was going to call Tyriel the mercurial intelligence, and I didn't have the books to hand, so I thought, just grab the cameo and I'll draw up his sigil on there. So I did it, And then when I got the book, I looked and go, hang on, that's not the same. And then I realised, and that then made me look at all the sigils and realise that they were all out. I wrote an article on it, which was published in an anthology in 2009. In fact, which also talked about the spirits, because most of the spirit ones are also incorrectly done. And I'm actually going to revisit that and expand it and pop it on my website in the near future, because one of the things I intend to do in the coming months is start putting like an archive of like pieces I've written that have gone into anthologies and other places where people might not have had access because they were limited runs or not in print anymore. So just to put more of my material like that people might find of use onto the website. So there's my thing that I'm offering to you. The
It's fascinating because
wrong.
I'm curious, like, since you said so many of the sigils were wrong, does that diminish the power of working with the spirit, or could we be dealing with a completely different spirit posing as the spirit we're intending to communicate with?
I actually had an amusing mental image of this. I had this image of like the intelligence is like sitting around and somebody calling one of them using the corrected ones, and the intelligence going, because I use the model of the crystal being like like say a phone. The conjuration is the ringing of the phone, and the sigil is the phone number.
Mm-hmm.
So I have this image of like the intelligence is sitting around and somebody using the corrected sigil and going, hey, somebody's ringing on the old number. Blimey, nobody's used that for 500 years since Agrippa switched it.
And are those in the manuscript that you sent us, the updated sigils?
No, because I had it in after that in the final draft.
Oh, okay, I'm gonna have to wait for the final draft then. Something to look forward to.
But what I do find important there is that it shows that those sigils, even though they weren't drawn correctly to those rules, still worked, and the power has been put into them over 500 years, so they will work. And
so it's become like an egregore at that point.
Yeah, and the magical momentum of doing the conjuration, which I think is the key point of it, that's your actual ringing of the phone, and all the preparation is sufficient, even if the sigil wasn't drawn to those rules, for the spirit to still turn up, to attract the attention of the spirit for it still to turn up.
That's fascinating. I'm going to share with you guys after the show. It's a theory of mine on maybe that's why I had a bit of a mishap. But David, before we let you go, we want to give you this opportunity now to promote yourself, upcoming books, works, workshops, or anything you have down the pipeline, because we here at magick.tv are here to support you.
Thank you. Well, I mean, Clavis Intelligentiarum will be opening for pre-orders on the hardback at the end of August, and the paperback is going to be available at the end of September. So that's mine. And then there's another project I was halfway through that I stopped to write this book because I had to, because I was inspired. Then after that, I'll be going back to start work on Volume 3 of the Grimoire Encyclopedia. So that's going to take out all of the next year or so, I think. Other works, well, at the moment I'm editing Jim Baker's next book, Inquiry into Necromancy, which is a fabulous book. If you've read his Cunning Man's Handbook, this is more of the same, but more exciting, because he's actually going through from the ancient world and then through all the major grimoires and looking at the actual practice of conjuration and kind of where it works and where it falls down. And it's beautifully written, and it's a wonderful work. I'm loving that. That's a big volume. I just recently edited Steve Savedale's Libra Umbrarum, which is from an Italian group, which is a system of practice, which, again, I think is very exciting because it's based on, it's like a synthesis of Abramelin and Heptameron and Key of Solomon, basically. And it's like a modern update. It's like a knowledge and conversation of the HTA operation that you can do in the modern world, whereas the Abramelin is kind of very difficult to practice in this day and age, to do the 6 or 18 months if you're going to do the full, not the Mavers, partial version. This system, which and this system will. That's not just for the HDA; it's also for connection with angels and demons and elemental spirits. It's very nicely put together. Steve's done a great job on it, and I mean that's a really interesting book. So, for people who are interested in doing that but can't, find the Abermellin feasible, which most can't anymore, in my opinion, this does offer a system that is a lot simpler and very clean and nice. I like it. There'll be what else is to come. I don't know. I'll get the next book to do. There's going to be more fun stuff. I mean, sorry,
what do we have to look forward to in the third volume of the Grimoire Encyclopedia? Because
I'm not going to share that yet. All
right. You're gonna keep us on our seats. All right, but we're really looking forward to it because we're great fans of it. So, David, thank you so much for taking the time. Once again, this is David Rankine, author, compiler of so many great works, also the editor in Hadean Press, one of the
I was saying Sarah Mastros' next book on the from Sefer Hatot of the Pentacles with Elizabeth Empyrean is going to be another lovely book to look out for next year.
Well, more power, and we're looking forward to supporting these. So do you have any parting words you want to say to your fans?
Well, I appreciate all the support and the messages I get from people, and I hope people will continue to find value in what I put out there, because at the end of the day, it's realizing your own genius and pursuing the great work of making yourself great, and through yourself, humanity. Spreading that positivity and truth and integrity around. That's why we're doing magic. At the end of the day, it's the next evolutionary step. It has to be.
Amen to that. So once again, thank you for joining us. Please don't go anywhere. I'm just going to end the show. Then we're just going to have a few minutes to just speak amongst ourselves. So once again, we will be announcing our next guest in the next week or two. I just have to arrange the schedule. But thank you very much, David. You're such a gentleman and a great gem to the occult society of the world. You've done so much for all of us from the bottom of our hearts. Thank you very much. So, Wade, see you next episode, buddy.
All right.
Thank you.
Don't go anywhere.